Mark, Shirley, hello, good morning. It's a new week. Mark is looking much better than he looked last week, although still not completely right because he had an operation, he claims, on his teeth, but it left him with a couple of black eyes. And anyway, that's his story. Shirley is one of my colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, always. Shirley is one of my colleagues at the Financial Mail Group and has been writing a cover story for the Financial Mail on Joburg, which was going to be our topic today. And we organized ourselves specifically for Shirley to come on today because today was the day that we would know who the ANC's mayoral candidates are. And how did that go, Shirley? I mean, how are we looking on that front?
Well, at last I saw, we're still waiting.
What a surprise!
It's been a while. It was supposed to be June, actually, that they were going to announce the mayoral candidates. Then they pushed it to the 15th, and their manifesto launch is supposed to be the 27th. So we can only hope that we'll know by next Saturday.
All right, but the big topic here is Joburg. Mark, you live in Joburg, don't you? You voluntarily, right? How do you feel about Joburg generally? Do you feel it's a world-class city?
Well, to be fair, I live in a bubble which floats around in Joburg. And I think that's, really the focal point of a lot of discussion is because there are various degrees of secure and insecure bubbles. And if you want to get down to the dirty, then you need to step outside of the world that you've defined for yourself and go like, is the stuff that I'm floating around in going to sink all bubbles? Because it's a mess. It's really a mess. And the truth of the matter is it gets worse the more you know.
Okay.
And so, I think we start with the numbers, and I think we start with the absence of truth, Tim and Shirley, which is this. I don't know what the numbers are. So for example, numbers are bandied about 300 billion deficit in this and 119 million, backlog in potholes and so on. But unless you start marking all the contracts to market and know that we fairly have evaluated, absent leakage, the true state of affairs of Johannesburg, you're in a mire which you will fail to conquer.
Yeah. Shirley, who's going to win, by the way, in Joburg? Who's going to be the next mayor? Can you please say this with authority as though we know?
Well, the next mayor is very hard to say at this stage. There's just too many variables at play. But all indication is that the DA is going to be the largest party come November 4. But how everything plays out from there is more tricksy. We're either looking at a DA coalition or DA-led coalition, which would require Action SA, which, is relatively dicey, or right. ANC tying up with MK, EFF, and presumably they'd need Action SA as well, or ANC DA, which could have popular support.
Okay.
You asked it to be definitive, Tim, and you got what you asked for, mate. Yeah, we know exactly that it's going to be one of many things, I think it
all right,
depends.
So just tell us the numbers from last time. What was what happened last time and what's the polling at the moment?
Last time the ANC, I think, was on about 33%, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
They have their high point was 20 years ago when they were at 62% of the city. In the latest polling, they've just bottomed out to 18%, which is just astounding. It speaks to the mismanagement of the city. The DA is up to 42% on the Common Sense and the SRF's polling.
Right.
And Action SA is sitting at 10%. So Action SA looks as though it could be something of a kingmaker in this scenario, provided the two parties, Action SA and the DA, can kind of be less at loggerheads.
No, I think what is the critical percentage that the DA needs to get? Let's take your hypothesis that they'll be the biggest party as given, say. 42 is not going to be enough. Then they have to marry someone. Okay. But maybe 46 is enough to get some scraps together, some 2%ers and 1%ers. And, whichever way you cut it in a coalition, the smallest common player that's required to get to 51 is a bit of a kingmaker. That's the reason why we all stand, in the headlights, stuck, incapable of making difficult decisions, let alone sane ones. So for me, the question is, can they get to 46 or 48 or, whatever the tipping point is? And, I don't know. And I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's either or DA plus someone or the other alternative, which is ANC plus, EFF plus Zuma. because those are two binary outcomes, neither of which seem to be the solution.
I mean, from people that I spoke to, one of the options obviously is a DA-ANC tie-up. And I mean, it's quite interesting if you look at that polling that came out of the Common Sense and the SRF last week, that there's actually broad support nationally for a coalition between the DA and the ANC in the instance of hung councils. So the people that they polled who strongly agree on a tie-up, they were sitting at about 50%, but it went up to 70% among ANC supporters looking for an ANC-DA tie-up. If you included those who somewhat agree, you've got broad support for an ANC-DA coalition amongst constituents.
Yeah, I mean, but isn't that a reflection of the fact that they're the two most popular parties? I mean, wouldn't you naturally get that? I mean, to me, the most interesting thing is the relationship between Helen Zille and Herman Mashaba. Because if they can get on, then, they've got it. And Herman Mashaba is not himself standing as the mayor of Joburg, right? So, so he's not in competition for the mayoralship against Helen Zille, and he which makes it probably more conceptually possible that Action SA DA alliance will win. One of the things that I watch now is the prediction markets, which I think is just so interesting because there was a little moment in which Kenny Koenig was the possible mayor. According to, I know, one shouldn't advertise these numbers because they're so speculative. But anyway.
But I mean, you're suggesting that two exes go away on holiday together. Okay. I mean,
well. Yes.
Two people that, if they are to believe, and that's the first point, are all these political utterances just combative rather than serious? Okay, because if they're serious, then how on earth can those two get into some form of consensus without some extraordinary trade-offs going through? I would like to see a change of the dialogue. I'd like to see less of vote for this party and more of vote for what we're going to do. If someone could stop talking about themselves just for a minute and talk about Johannesburg, that would be useful. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. This is who we are.
Yeah. No. I find politicians are very prone to doing that. They
worse,
often
Tim. They give each other free advertising. They talk about who they are, and then they criticize who they aren't by referring to the others who aren't them. Okay, now where in that mix are you supposed to find out what their plan is and how much depth they've gone into an understanding of the fact that 50% of the water leaks and the leakages are caused by this and that and the next thing? It's not all as simple as it appears. So, the electricity leakage is 20%. And what is that? That's, crooked connections. The water leakage is part maintenance, part theft, and if you look at the element in the income statement called corruption, which never used to be there when we studied finance. Now there's a line called corruption. And the corruption needs to be diagnosed away from blatant stealing into structural theft, if you like, which is, the awarding of non-market value contracts and all of that sort of stuff. And so I haven't seen any deep analysis of the status quo of Johannesburg. And one of the things to end off is, unless they draw a line behind the debt in Johannesburg and the uncollectible, and I can talk about this a bit later, the debtors, there is no plan that will work. You have to get a starting point that's got a credible foundation for a future. And we don't have that if we adopt and carry all the baggage that we've already got.
Shirley, can I ask you one question about that poll? Do you really believe that 18% number about the ANC? I mean, it seems to me instinctively possible, just because the ANC has just been such a disaster. I mean, I don't know whether I can't remember exactly, but I think you were responsible for the story that the ANC have in Joburg moved out of the city centre, which they decided to refurbish, into a building and then cut off their own electricity because they didn't pay it. Is this, I mean, I think that was the low point of the, of the dysfunction.
I mean, they've taken expansion to whole new levels. Look, I mean, mean, on the 18% figure, I think it's possible. You know, the ANC it's blamed for a lot of what's wrong in the city, and very rightly so, but it also has done nothing to campaign so far. And voters' perceptions are hardening. They're not seeing the ANC on the street. They don't have a figurehead. You know, in previous years, quite ridiculously, the ANC campaigned with Cyril Ramaphosa's face on all the municipal posters because he's the most popular figure in the party. But they haven't even done that at this stage. You know, they haven't even rolled out Ramaphosa to try and get votes. There's just nothing. And so it's not surprising to me that they've created.
I think the real challenge is apathy. And I think a lot of ANC loyalists would rather not vote than vote for the opposition. You know, and I think that therein lies a potential structural problem in the voting outcome. So they won't switch allegiance because the loyalties run far and deep. And so you're going to have potentially quite a low turnout, which again is an indictment on who we elect to be in charge of us, if only a few of us do so.
I mean, it's quite interesting. Davy Scholtz, the elections analyst, has done some of the modelling on turnout. And it's amazing the difference it makes. You know, the turnout in the sort of suburbs, the traditionally white areas in Joburg, have a much higher turnout. In 2016, I think it was up to 67% or something like that, whereas the township predominantly black areas dropped to 37%, I think. So that could really hurt the ANC as well if it just can't turn out its vote. Whereas with all the hype around the election, the DA is really pushing to turn out its supporters in those predominantly white areas.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, just looking at as a media consumer, I have to say, I think Helen Zille is fighting an absolutely star campaign. I mean, just objectively, she's been out there with her rubber duck in the potholes. You know, it's a sort of like, she's strangely very good at this. You know, she's quite an abrasive personality in some ways, but in just attracting attention. You know, she has that kind of gift. Do you think she'll be an effective mayor? I mean, she was an effective mayor in Cape Town, but it took years. I mean, it took, a decade before Cape Town really turned around, right? So, maybe it's, what do you think, Mark?
I think there's another bridge to cross, which is, can political power finally be convinced that it should utilize that power to appoint expertise, not cadres? Because I haven't found a party not guilty of cadre deployment.
Yes.
And so, the real issue is, you have to get the votes. Issue one, get into the position of power. Issue two, appoint the professionals to do the job. And by that, I don't mean outsource it. I know the DA leadership is talking about, completely outsourcing. I don't support that. And I don't support privatization, because I think the intersection between state function and expertise and capacity should come together rather than part ways. But I think it's what you do with the power as well. So I'm very much tell me what the election result is, tell me who's in charge, and tell me what they're going to do rather than how we go. Because I think speculating on who's going to get there. So I think Helen would make a good orchestra conductor. But yes. I don't know whether she can play the violin, and I don't know whether she needs to.
Yes, I think she probably does in this case. Having the experience of turning around Cape Town is a big plus for her. Obviously. But, Cape Town, it is interesting. Cape Town and Joburg, they operate on a very different basis, and they have very different, because Cape Town had a sort of city control over most of its functions. Joburg has these sort of external groups like Pick It Up, who's doing the waste management. They have different organizations which have their own sort of internal logic and their own histories to deal with. It's just structurally, it's more complicated than it seems, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, it seems like we've done that topic. Let's move on. Mark, what else is happening in the world that you worried about? Are you worried about peace, for example? Are you a peacenik? Do you feel that peace should be given a chance?
I don't know what a peacenik is, but I'm not a warnik. Okay, I'll tell you that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it occurs to me, Tim, that if we got rid of a handful of people, we'd save the lives of thousands and thousands of people. It seems to me that at the center of these wars are the egos and ambitions and ideologies of a very few old men. And it's time to try and look past that. Every time I look at the news and I see someone's bombed someone else or killed someone else, I go, like, have you not got the intellectual capacity and foresight to sit around a table, or do you have to bludgeon each other? Instead of thinking that might is right, why don't we think that right is might, and start turning that thing around and start working out what's right? Anyway, I'm hot full of war, to use an accounting term, and it's proving. And here's the thing that worries me most. I can't see, under the current various leaders, any off-ramp, as they're referring to it now. I think this war goes on forever in different forms of escalation, and that's what worries me. And it starts having far-reaching economic consequences, which have far-reaching individual consequences about unemployment and poverty and all those kinds of things, and isolation. And so, I've had enough of it, man. And surely we have the intellect to rise above that.
Yeah, it's one of those things about a Ukraine that is just so
I addressed that to Shirley. I said, surely we have the intellect to rise above that. I mean, Shirley, keep up with the program, Tim. Okay.
Shirley has never heard that joke before. I mean, surely she has.
Surely
not. Surely not.
Forgive me, but it begged beckoning. Okay, yeah.
Shirley, what is your position on war? Do you think we should give peace a chance?
I absolutely think we should give it peace a chance. No, I mean, I'm with Mark here. It's just been dragging on. There's no end in sight, and it's egos at play. There's no definitive plan for ending all of this.
Do you find it as strange as I do that Russians seem to just be going along with this? Is that odd to you? I mean, we're talking about a war which, Russian intellectuals themselves don't see a sort of long-term victory for the Russian state. Because let's assume that they eventually win this war. Let's assume that they eventually crush Ukraine, which, they're not going to do, right? But, I mean, then what are you left with? Then you're left with a kind of satellite state that they have to dominate for centuries. It's it's just not doable. I don't know what to make of the number of people being killed in the war, but, we're talking about thousands per day. And yet Russians seem to be just rolling forward with it. Is that because they have no choice, or because they sort of agree, or because they don't see an option? I'd be interested in that question. I don't know. We're too far away for it, of course.
It should be worth working out what percentage of GDP is made up by the economics of wars. Okay, and the production of defense capabilities and weaponry and all of that, because it's a huge percentage. America sort of had to be under the threat of war because the GDP was like 50%. The defense GDP was like 50% of total GDP. It kept people in jobs and now they feel they sort of actually have to be at war. And then, then we have their leadership, which is inclined to create wars and then withdraw from wars. And I don't even want to get into that debate. But I think there's a lot of economics and a lot of ideology.
Oh, so you sound incredibly like a hippie. Are you? Your hair is not long enough for you to be, sprouting John Lennon in South Africa in 2020.
I'm not a lefty hippie kind of cool dude kind of oak. No, I'm not. Okay, but the futility of it is becoming so manifestly obvious by its incremental, purging of things. It's like these wildfires that have gone all over Europe, which have been astonishingly horrible, okay, and overwhelming, almost difficult to believe. You sit and watch this fire in 2026, and you watch how out of control it gets, okay, and how weak we are, as it turns out, against the forces of nature, and you go like, okay, we eventually quell that. It has a limit, and then we stop it, and then we rebuild. But what we have is a smoldering, the sources of which are not known or controllable. The different ideologies and religions and purposes are just, I mean, when you look at that little run around the fence and become another country in Morocco, you kind of wonder what possessed 50,000 people to walk around in their shorts, swim in the sea, those who could swim, and get to the other side. And what were you then going to do? And it sort of brings into focus SADC. Now, SADC, you could argue, has got a lot of things to talk about. Yeah, and the one thing I think would be disastrous is if we said we're the new Europe of Africa, no more borders. Can you imagine a no more borders SADC? Okay, and I don't even want to get into the illegal and non-illegal immigrants and all that sort of stuff. But the world has an issue with borders and what defines them and what is the purpose and protection of a sovereign state. And I think that's all a little bit up in the air.
And I mean, just by the way, at the SADC conference, there is now, sort of concern about an anti-foreigner march taking place outside of SADC, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
But we are different in some ways, because what brings this home to you is when you go into the Kruger Park and you go up to the northern border, and then you get to the mighty Limpopo, which is the border between us and Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and you realize that it's actually not mighty at all.
It's dry.
It is not the grey,
it's
greasy.
a bridge.
Yes, no, exactly. In fact, while I was sitting there once, cows came over from Zimbabwe and then went back again.
Yeah.
So that is the security of our
control.
borders. Yeah. No, exactly. Precisely. All right, people. Well, it's been fun. Thank you for your views and everything. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the like button, because it helps other people find the podcast, which we have great fun putting out. And we thank you for watching as always. And Shirley, thanks for joining us. And
thanks, Shirley.
Good luck with
Thanks for putting up with us.
Sure. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Those
Bye.
guys.